In 2014, the Montana Historical Society published a comprehensive catalog of the Society's incredible CMR Russell art. The catalog, written by my colleague Kirby Lambert and me, and designed and published and edited at the Montana Historical Society Press, was launched in a celebration of Charlie's 150th birthday. Now, the project was years in the making. There had been talk of such a catalog for years, since the 1950s, since we received the McKay collection. But the stars did not align until recently for this project to happen, and I think it was well worth the wait. But bear with me, because we at the Historical Society are historians. We always feel the need to start at the very beginning. And in this case, it's just over 150 years ago. In 1864, three things happened that ultimately led to our gathering here today. In Washington, D.C., President Abraham Lincoln signed the legislation carving Montana Territory from the eastern half of the Idaho Territory. In a rustic frontier settlement of Bannock, the first Montana territorial legislature authorized the establishment of the Historical Society of Montana to collect and arrange facts in regard to the early history of this territory. And in St. Louis, a prominent family celebrated the birth of a son, sturdily built and as blonde as a Swede. Charlie was born in St. Louis, Missouri on March 19, 1864, and in spite of the cowboy persona that he would later project, the Russell family was, in actuality, well-established and well-connected. Along with his siblings and a number of cousins, the Russell spent most of his rambunctious childhood at Oak Hill, a former plantation which, by Charlie's time, was evolving into a suburb of St. Louis. Charlie's mom, Mary, was universally regarded as pious, warm, and devoted. The daughter of a highly regarded jeweler and silversmith, she was an accomplished amateur artist in her own right, and it was she who encouraged the Russell children in artistic, creative pursuits. Charlie's dad, Silas Russell, helped manage the family's many commercial concerns, which included a clay quarry and a fire brick and tile making firm, which played a significant role in the industrial growth of St. Louis. If Russell inherited his artistic inclinations from his mother, he inherited his love for reading from his father. Although Charlie was never successful academically, he did love to read the leather-stocking tales of James Fenimore Cooper, dime novels like those featuring Ned Buntline and other Western lore. According to Russell biographer John Tulliver, it would be impossible to overestimate the effect of such books on Charlie's development. In addition to the dime novels that fueled the young artist's fascination with the West, Charlie also heard stories about his paternal grandmother's family, the Bents, who played a notable and sometimes violent role in the development of the Southwest. Among other activities, they established Bent's Fort in present-day Colorado in 1833. For most of its 16-year existence, the fort played a crucial role in expanding the fur trade across the region and the commercial success of the Santa Fe Trail. Oops, I've gotten ahead of myself here, I'm so sorry. In addition to these dime novels and family stories, the bustling St. Louis waterfront served as irresistible lure for the would-be mountain man. As Charlie's wife Nancy would later write, his teachers gave him up because he could not be made to study. The levees of his hometown, however, had an irresistible fascination for the lad. He played hooky, and she noted, the hours he should have been in school he spent at the riverfront, watching and talking to all sorts of men, unconsciously starting to build the foundation of his life work. And as we'd seen before yesterday, these are drawings from his childhood sketchbook. They show his early obsession with the frontier, as well as his interest with artists such as Carl Bodmer and George Callan. Finally, after an unsuccessful stint at the military boarding school back east, Charlie's parents yielded to his persistent pleading that he be allowed to venture west. They hoped that the reality of the life of the harsh frontier would end his daydreaming, and he returned happily to St. Louis and joined the family business. They were, however, wrong. Never again would Russell call any place but Montana home. Charlie left Missouri in the spring of 1880. He was just shy of his 16th birthday. He traveled with Pike Miller, a friend of his father who owned a ranch in the Judith Basin. They traveled by train to Utah, then stagecoach to Helena. They stayed in the capital city only long enough to stock up on supplies before setting out on horseback to the Judith Basin, a difficult trip which took 3 weeks. Much to the young adventurer's dismay upon arriving at Miller's ranch, he was given the job of herding sheep, a job which he did not like. As Russell later put it, "I lost those sheep quicker than Miller could replace them." The two quarreled, and after only a short stint, Charlie left Miller's employ, abruptly provisioned with only his bedroll, mare, and pack horse. Fortunately for the impetuous youth, his path soon crossed that with Jake Hoover, a hunter, trapper, prospector, and all-around mountain man, 32 years old and already well steeped in the ways of the frontier. Hoover's cabin, which would serve as Russell's next home, was located on the South Fork of the Judith River. Russell described it as shut off from the world, a hunter's paradise bounded by the walls of mountains, where nature had surely done her best, and no king of the old times could have claimed a more beautiful and bountiful domain, he said. Although accounts differ on the specifics of his time at Hoover's, all agree that the mountain man played a pivotal role in Russell's transition into true Montana. And in 1882, Russell was hired as a nighthawk for the Judith Basin Spring Roundup. Roundups were the annual features of open range ranching in which cattle had been wintered over en masse and separated by the owner. The nighthawk's job was to tend the horse herds, letting them feed but not stray while others slept. And for the next 11 years, Charlie supported himself by working as a wrangler during the spring and fall roundups, then foraging as best he could to make it through the winter. He wasn't, however, particularly adept hand. He said, "I'm not what people think a cowboy should be," he admitted. "I was neither a good roper nor rider, but I worked the big outfits and always held my job." As in this quote by former MHS director K. Ross Toole, Russell personifies Montana. In documenting the Society's collection of Russell artwork, the catalog Montana's Charlie Russell celebrates the Society's unique role in both preserving and telling the story of the region's history and the life and legacy of Montana's favorite son. But the collection had an interesting beginning. One day in October 1909, Montana's acclaimed cowboy artist visited the Montana Historical Society, which was then located in the ground floor of the state capitol. He signed the guest book, and you can see October 1, he signed our guest book. He carried a watercolor to the Society's librarian, William Y. Pemberton, and said he thought the Society should have it for future generations. These are the Society offices at that time. The painting that he handed Pemberton was titled York. It was Russell's remarkable interpretation of a moment when York, Captain William Clark's slave and member of the Corps of Discovery, is met by the disbelieving Hidatsa Indians in March of 1805. The gift, although presented by the artist without fanfare, was noted in the local newspaper, the Helena Independent. C.M. wrote, "C.M. Russell, Montana's cowboy artist, has just presented the state's historical library at the Capitol a valuable historical painting. It is known as the York Picture." This masterpiece was the first of many works by the artist that now comprise the collection of the Montana Historical Society, and it's particularly significant that it was given to the Society by the artist himself. And apparently the artist had been contemplating a gift to the Society for some time. In 1902, the newspapers wrote, "Befitting indeed will be the contribution which Charles M. Russell, the cowboy artist, will make to the Historical Society. Mr. Russell has written to Mrs. Laura Howey, the Secretary of the State Historical Society, informing him of his intentions to paint what he thinks will be his masterpiece and present it to the state of Montana." As Mr. Russell adds, the article goes on, "The greatest state in God's green earth, a state where the latchstring is always out to the stranger or weary wayfarer, and the state where hospitality is not measured by the almighty daughter." The article goes on, "Just what subject Mr. Russell will choose for his painting is to be a guess, but it is presumed it will be something typical of the state, perhaps a prairie or mining scene." Well, no, years later, he gave us, fortunately, York. As a side note, Laura Howey, who was referred to as the secretary in the article, was actually appointed the position of head librarian in 1898 and she brought a new sense of professionalism to the Society's library. She created a card catalog, found the library's historic newspaper collection, collected and organized state documents, published 4 volumes on the recollections and diaries from Montana's pioneers, and actively lobbied for funding from both the state legislature and private donors. But her tenure was cut short. In 1907, Montana's Attorney General, Albert Galen, declared it unconstitutional for a woman to hold a state office. Yeah. By the early 1950s, the Society, which then was well into its 8th decade, had outgrown its headquarters in the capital and moved into its new location across the street. The plans for the modern international-style building called for a Russell Room, even though at this time the Society only owned a small fraction of artwork necessary to fill such a space. Fortunately, through the generosity of the McKay family, the Society acquired the outstanding collection of C.M. Russell art that had been assembled by Malcolm McKay. Malcolm, an outdoor enthusiast and close friend of Russell, was a New York financier whose passion for Russell's art resulted in a remarkable collection of his work. And following his death, Malcolm's family arranged for the collection to be returned to the Treasure State, where it could be appreciated and enjoyed by the people of Montana. It was originally exhibited in the Northern Hotel in Billings, located close enough to the family's Lazy E.L. ranch in Roscoe, prior to becoming part of the Montana's Historical Society. The collection contains 43 pieces, 12 oils, 7 watercolors, 17 pen and inks, and 7 bronzes. And once Malcolm's carefully chosen masterworks were displayed at the Historical Society's sleek new galleries, donations of other Russells flowed in. The McKay collection does remain the heart of the world-class collection we have today. In the 1980s, a new addition was added to the Historical Society building with the new McKay Gallery of C.M. Russell art named in honor of the family of Malcolm S. McKay Sr. to showcase the Society's burgeoning Russell art collection. In honor of Charlie's 150th birthday, we threw a party and reopened the newly remodeled gallery that included exhibit drawer units with protective non-glare glass, enabling the viewers to get it up close and personal to the works on paper, and protecting them as well. And throughout the gallery, we added LED lighting, making it more enjoyable for the visitor, as well as protecting the artwork. As noted by William Cameron in this quote, Russell was a master of a wide variety of artistic media, and we're fortunate that the artworks in the Society collection illustrate the breadth and depth of his genius, both in terms of development as an artist and his ability to master these different media. As a boy, Russell's imagination was fired by the books he read, the tales he heard, the works of other artists with which he studied. But after coming to Montana, his artistic vision would be fueled by his own experience, coupled with his love of his adopted home state. The earliest examples in the Society's collection, this is the earliest example, is a small watercolor of a group of untitled Indian vignettes that Russell painted in a single page of an autograph book. It's very small. While he was visiting in St. Louis in 1882, he signed C.M. Russell, and it bears the realistic buffalo skull of the style of many of his early works. And this very small piece is typical of his early watercolor efforts, somewhat muddied, yet it still successfully captures the images on one very small page. The earliest drawings in the collection are rough pencil sketches, only slightly improved artistically from those in his boyhood sketchbook. For the most part, they were created to document a particular place or event and given away as souvenirs. These drawings were executed in pencil, the easiest material for an itinerant cowboy to carry with him on whatever paper he had on hand. And here's one example. In 1888, William and Annetta Long, who were residents of Philbrook, hired mountain man Jake Hoover to guide them on a hunting trip. And Hoover's help along the way included a fiddler, a cook, and Russell, who drew this sketch for the Longs to document their adventures. And according to family lore, Mrs. Long was very style conscious and asked Russell to make sure that he depicted her French heels, which were the height of fashion. And you can just see her French heels there. Among the most notable of the Society's holdings are the 24 oil paintings that form the vibrant core of the permanent collection of Russell art. Like many of these paintings, Men of the Open Range offers a realistic depiction of cowboy life in a bygone era. Riders set out at daybreak and to begin a long day's work. They leave behind their cow camp, which is still visible in the river far below them, and the white horse that dominates the center of the image has a blindfold attached to the bridle and red spur marks on his shoulders, clear indications that the morning did not begin peacefully for the rider and his green-broke mount. I don't know if you can see the spur marks. Brian Dippy, Russell scholar, heralds this painting as perhaps Russell's supreme achievement in his later years, noting that the substantial foreground works to create an aura of monumentality. The painting conveys a splendid feeling of land and light and freedom as the cowboys scatter at the start of a new day. Not all of Russell's paintings were executed on canvas or paper. Early in his career, a dearth of available supplies dictated the need for the young cowboy to paint on whatever material was at hand. From shoebox lids to bunkhouse walls, and even though the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad through Montana in 1883 meant the provisions of all kinds, including art supplies, were more readily available, Russell continued to use non-traditional materials, ranging from birch bark to cement, when the notion struck him. The most unusual canvas in the Society's collection is this metal medallion that was originally part of a bank vault door. Russell spent the winter of 1880-81 in Lewistown, where he was commissioned to produce 2 oil paintings for the bank of Fergus County. And according to the bank manager, Wilford Johnson, the commission was timely. He said, "Charlie was trying to get through a hard winter. He was broke and had been drinking rather heavily. He was desperately hard up." Charlie's extraordinary artistic abilities surfaced at a very young age when he began modeling horses from flower-making wax that he pilfered from his sister Susan, who later recalled that the young Charlie always carried a chunk of wax in his pocket and modeled almost incessantly. Laura Edgar Whitmer, whose father ranched in Jew's Basin, and who was Charlie's first love, recalled many years later that he could do the most amazing things without looking at him. A lump of clay worked under the table would appear a horse, a bear, or perhaps an Indian. He found a very smooth deposit of terracotta clay in the riverbank, and this provided material for figures and groups that could be found in many cabins up and down the valley. And this tiny pig, it's very small, it's no bigger than a pair of dice, is typical of the many small sculptural pieces that Russell loved to make quickly and give to his friends. Charlie's nephew, Austin, recounted, in his pants pocket, he always had a lump of beeswax modeled black from handling, and while he was talking, he would take it out and work it soft and model a pig, a buffalo, or whatnot. And often these small pieces did not survive because he was constantly manipulating the wax. Austin recalled, he would look at it in an inquiring way, then mash it out with his thumb and make something else. In addition to the wondrous sights exhibited at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, they were treated to the spectacular hit play, Ben-Hur. The show first ran on Broadway in November of 1899 to 1900, and it was so popular they revived it for a traveling tour across the country. And it appeared in St. Louis in October of 1904 at the Olympic Theater. Featuring a cast of 350 players, the spectacle included the interior of a Roman trireme, the Bacchanalian festivities of the Grove of Daphne, the housetop palace of the Her of Jerusalem, and a show-stopping race between 2 chariots powered by 8 live horses, all presented with the accompanying music of the Olympic Orchestra. And every performance of the big playhouse sold out. Nancy and Charlie were visiting St. Louis at this time while Russell was exhibiting several of his works at the fair, and he took Austin to see the show. Austin later recalled, "He took me to see the Ben-Hur and the famous chariot race. Afterwards, he modeled me a quadriga, a 4-horse chariot mounted on a block of wood and painted and gilded. It had lots of action, but the horses were right off the range and ran with their heads up and their tails flagged in a manner most unclassical." And in addition to crafting models to entertain friends and onlookers and give as gifts, Charlie often created sculptures to aid him in his composition and shadow and lighting in his paintings. His cousin, Fergus Mead, recalled, Charlie used to keep a hunk of plasticine on his painting stand, and he'd get stuck on a painting of a face. He'd model the head and then paint from the little clay model, holding it in a position that would light as he wanted. Although somewhat time-worn, Russell's fingerprints can still be seen on this painted wax of this carefully modeled figure, especially around the area of the writer's forearm. By the turn of the century, Russell had developed a keen interest in casting small figures of plaster in multiple copies that later would be hand-painted. Russell admired a longhorn steer owned by Christopher Dickinson. He modeled the steer as a gift to him, this one. He portrayed reclining longhorn with XT bar brand prominently displayed on its ribs. Russell was fascinated by longhorns, which he called greyhounds wearing horns. He said they were sure surprised at those old cow ponies that had been running shorthorns all their life. Smoking Up was the first Russell sculpture to be cast in bronze, He made the original wax model in 1904 on a visit to New York City and sold it to the New York Cooperative Society, which had the piece cast by the Roman Bronze Works. And it depicts a raucous cowboy riding a rearing horse, whooping and hollering and shooting his gun, smoking it up after spending the wages at a local watering hole. And one of his favorite subjects, Russell repeatedly immortalized buffalo in clay, wax, and paint. Though the vast herds that had once filled the plains were gone by the time Russell first came to Montana, they held an abiding fascination for him. Robert F. Morgan, the Society's curator emeritus, summed up Russell's passion for the buffalo. No one before or since has caught the majesty of the shaggy beast on the vast prairies. In American Cattle was Russell's first bronze that served as a utilitarian as well as aesthetic function. It can be used as bookends. And although his bronzes are quite wonderful, Russell really preferred the original models and painted plasters over the bronzes. Perhaps, as Austin recalled, Charlie loved to model, but was never satisfied with a bronze casting. He wanted more detail, which he felt bronze did not adequately capture. Since bronze is sold for more than plaster cast, however, it was his wife Nancy's who recognized the financial benefit to be gained from this medium, and it was she who encouraged and assisted him in this pursuit. And this is her Pasadena home, Trails End, after Russell had passed away. The fact, as he told the reporter, Russell did truly love and long for the Old West is readily apparent in his artwork, and the Society's collection fully represents the central themes to which the Cowboy Artist devoted his career, and for which he is so well known. First and foremost of these themes, of course, was that of the open-range Cowpuncher. The Circle Diamond brand in this example belonged to the Bloom Cattle Company, which was headquartered in Trinidad, Colorado. And note, the errant cow was branded when it was small, and then the brand increased in size as the cow grew. The subject shown here was one that Russell was very familiar with, and having depicted in ornithunking bronze paintings and sculptures a number of times. Of course, the famous Bronx breakfast. Russell left no written word documenting the inspiration for this painting, so it might have been a particular event, or it might just have been Russell retelling a common cowboy yarn. He depicts himself seated on the right with a plate of food, watching the twisting bronc kick the morning coffee, bacon-filled frying pan, and Dutch oven biscuits in the fire. Finding humor in such events is a hallmark of many of Russell's works. However, he never wished to see anyone harmed. A friend who was a fellow cowboy on the range with Russell recounted, he got a kick out of anything that happened as long as no one was injured. He was the most scared fellow I ever saw when there was the least chance of anyone getting hurt. If a fellow got thrown off a bucking horse, Charlie would actually turn white until the rider got on his feet again. And then he'd hightail it to get a pencil and paper and draw a comic picture of the happening. Another of the artist's favorite themes was the passing of the frontier. Although Russell's art is now synonymous with open-range cattle ranching, when he was a boy growing up in St. Louis, it was the mountain man that was the first frontier character to fuel his interest in the West. Painted when Charlie was at the height of his career, Free Trapper pays homage to this idealized figure of his youth, the adventurous men who traveled the early West and the independent agents who were working for themselves rather than one of the fur trading companies. Another subject that Russell loved to portray was the traditional lifeways of Montana's first people. In fact, he portrayed Native Americans more than any other subject matter. Indian Hunter's Return captures the excitement and relief that greets a small party of blood hunters as they return to camp at dusk, bringing the buffalo meat and hides that mean survival for the families. Their painted teepees have been situated in the river bottom, nestled among the leafless cottonwoods to help provide protection in the harsh winter. The orange glow of the day's end, along with the presence of European trade goods you see, colorful blankets, a metal pot lying in the snow beneath the cooking tripod, all foreshadow the coming demise of their traditional lifeways. Malcolm McKay's son Bill recalled that visitors to their New Jersey home sometimes commented that the beauty of the picture was spoiled for them by the inclusion of the dogs lapping in the blood that seeps from the dead animals. And when informed of this criticism, Russell's response was, according to Bill, "Tell him that's the way it was and I'm not going to change it." So well known for focusing on these themes, a woman interested in Russell's work once wrote to Nancy, "If Charlie ever painted a painting that did not have Indians, cowboys, or violence in it, she'd be interested in purchasing it." And Nancy did eventually sell her a painting of a buffalo. And as we do know, Russell did paint other subjects. For example, we have Lolly. History documents two great romances in Russell's life. The second was Nancy Cooper Russell, his wife of 30 years, who Mary Jane Bradbury so wonderfully brought to life yesterday. His first love, however, was Laura Edgar, whose father was a prominent St. Louis merchant for a time, also operated a sheep ranch in Montana's Judith Basin. Lolly, as she was affectionately known, spent the school year in St. Louis, but returned every summer to her family ranch, where she and Russell, who was 4 years her senior, were thrown together constantly. Many years later, Laura recalled, "One year I went back to St. Louis to school, a little girl in short skirts and hair down my back. The winter changed all that. I came home with my hair put up and my skirts long. Charlie liked this change and he told me so. Where we had been comrades before, we'd become sweethearts, and we were sure our romance was the most beautiful thing and that ever happened and that it would never die." Understandably, Laura's parents were less than enthusiastic about the budding romance between their young daughter and the itinerant cowboy. When in 1886, the Edgar family sold their ranch and returned permanently to St. Louis, Russell was truly brokenhearted, as evidenced by this portrait, which he painted more than half a decade after the couple's paths diverged. This painting, very atypical for Russell, is believed to have been created for a candy booth that Leela Roberts set up as a fundraiser for a church social in Cascade sometime between 1896 and 97. Russell and Nancy married in Cascade in 1896, and it is thought that she and her friends talked him into contributing this watercolor for the effort. Both Leela and her husband, Ben Roberts, were close friends of the Russells, and the Roberts home is where Nancy first met Russell and where they were married. Additionally, Montana's wildlife provided abiding subject matter for the artists. The natural world that inspired the numerous changes wrought progress over the past century and a half continued to play a central role for its themes. Russell painted When the Land Belonged to God to hang in the reading room for the Montana Club, Helena's prestigious Gentlemen's Association. Considered by many to be Russell's masterwork, it is set in the Missouri River at daybreak, a few miles downstream from the town of Fort Benton. And having just crossed the river, a small group of bison with steaming backs and dripping fur stand momentarily paused dramatically on a rocky knoll, filling the center of the image and dominating the painting's foreground. And behind them, a never-ending stream of buffalo trail down the far hills across the river in their wake. The sun rises, striking the faces of the lead buffaloes and the distant bluffs, lending both drama and brilliant color to the scene. There's a distinctive group of landmarks that you can see: Frenchman's Ridge, Square Butte, Round Butte, and the Highwood Mountains. Hungry wolves, a bison skeleton, and beaver-scarred snag complete the picture's central elements. And the sage grouse, hidden in the foreground, adding the sense of Russell's inescapable whimsy for those who studied the painting carefully enough to discern the camouflage bird. And there's the bird right there. In 2010, When the Land Belonged to God was on exhibit in the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, as part of the Masterworks of Charles M. Russell exhibit, Houston Chronicle reporter Douglas Britt wrote in his blog after seeing this painting, he said, "It's a mere illustration and reproduction. I'm still reeling from the shock of seeing it. Nothing I can write this morning will prepare you for standing in front of what is unquestionably one of the greatest American paintings ever." He encouraged the readers to just go early and often, and he titled his blog, "A Painting You Must See Before You Die." In 1905, Charlie and Nancy bought a lot on the shores of Lake McDonald near the community of Apgar that would 5 years later become Glacier National Park. They built the cabin and christened it Bullhead Lodge in honor of Charlie's signature buffalo skull. Beginning in 1906, they spent every summer in the park, always accompanied by a host of friends and relatives. And in 1912, he wrote fellow artist Phil Goodwin, "We spent 2 months at the lake and had a pretty good time. The deer are getting very tame since shooting is barred. Several times they came right down to the front of the cabin. I put salt onto the trail and they come off into the lake." Now I happen to know the Park Service frowns on putting salt out for deer these days. Glacier was close in physical distance to Great Falls, but worlds away in terms of scenery, flora, and fauna. Russell loved both. In 1926, shortly after what would prove to be his last visit to Bullhead Lodge, he wrote, "We have just returned from our mountain camp where the big hills look very beautiful in their fall clothing of many colors. When it comes to making the beautiful, Ma Nature has man beat all ways from the east, and that old lady still owns a lot of Montana." And the photographs here depict Charlie and Nancy on the porch of Bullhead Lodge and with guests picnicking on the shore of Lake McDonald. And Russell drew the sketch that you see of Bullhead Lodge on the top right on one of the privacy screens they used as guest registers for their cabin. One of Charlie's favorite wildlife subjects was bears. This model of honey hunters portrays a mother bear and her cubs climbing a tree. The bears are modeled in dark brown wax, and the tree is made of a smooth weathered pine. The mother bear is perched near the top, listening for danger while the 2 cubs frolic below. I think this is one of his sweet pieces. I love this one. Range Father features a wild stallion chasing down a wolf. The wolf runs flat out with his tail between his legs in a desperate attempt to escape the steed, who is protecting his brood. Russell held the wild horse in great regard, and he deplored the practice of culling vast numbers of wild horses from the plains. He wrote, "Some people have forgotten that the range horse helped make this country. All gold and silver was discovered with cayuses. Any old-timer that ships horses to butchers is worse than a cannibal." Not everyone then or now is lucky enough to own an original Russell or even be able to see one. So in addition to the sales of original artworks, Nancy cultivation of money collectors. Charlie's reputation grew as an illustrator of books and magazines. And not only did this bring needed income, but more importantly, it enabled Russell to develop a nationwide following. Publications showcasing his images, starting with local advertisements and calendars like this one, spread Russell's fame in ways that original works could not. While some of these pen sketches were completed for other purposes, most were produced to illustrate stories published in magazines, books, and newspapers, and many were commissions for works authored by famous national writers like Owen Wister, the author of The Virginian, while others were commissioned by Russell's good friends like Frankfurt Linderman and Malcolm McKay. And this is another example of the many books that Russell was commissioned to illustrate. And Brian talked about this a little bit yesterday, John Beacom. And you can see it says 1894, but with information from Brian's research, we now know it's probably no earlier than 1897. So thank you, Brian, for continuing to add to our information on this. It recounts the Blackfeet legend and explained how men, with the assistance from his animal friends, had gained the upper hand over the buffalo from the beginning of time, had ruled all other creatures. It featured 8 illustrations commissioned by Russell, including 1 black and white oil painting, 5 black and white watercolors, and 2 small sketches. And the sketch shown here is one of 2 additional illustrations that Russell added to his own copy of the book. It shows an Indian man talking to beaver and fox. They were central characters in the narrative. But Russell not only illustrated works by other writers, he also was an unequaled storyteller in his own right, and his skill as a storyteller in both words and pictures reached its apogee in the publication he illustrated Rawhide Rollins stories, which began appearing in Montana's newspapers in 1916. In that year, the Montana Newspaper Association, which was co-owned by Russell's good friend, Prissy Raybon, began featuring occasional cowboy yarns in its weekly supplement. They were distributed into smaller newspapers statewide, and these yarns were written by Russell, but were narrated by the fictitious cowboy named Rawhide Rollins. In 1921, the Newspaper Association published Rawhide Rollins stories in an anthology of 17 of these tales, followed by 1925, the sequel, More Rawhides, and at the time of his death, he was working on the third book, Trails Plowed Under, which was finished by Nancy and published in 1927. These books all proved to be immensely popular for the same reason Russell's art was. Long before Russell was an acclaimed artist or published author, he was celebrated by those who knew him for his philosophy and wit. Coupled with Russell's humor was his generosity toward and deep devotion to those he recounted as his friends. The conviction that if he liked a friend, there was nothing he would not do for them was frequently echoed, and in describing the depth of his friendship for people, Nancy asserted, "Anyone who knew him at all loved him, and I don't know anyone who has as many friends as he had." Painted 1 year before his death, Laugh Kills Lonesome is one of only 2 nocturnal paintings of the Society's Russell collection. It was also the most unabashedly nostalgic. Beleaguered by ill health and living in the 20th century's West that continued to change in ways not to his liking, Russell increasingly dwelt in the past. No painting better illustrates this mourning of a lost time and place, the frontier he loved when he first arrived in Montana, than does Laugh Kills Lonesome. He included himself in the painting, standing beside a favorite horse, just inside the firelight glow. The DHS brand on the chuck wagon indicates it is part of the Davis, Hauser, and Stewart Cattle Company, an outfit which Charlie rode as a young man, and it was the youthful friendships that he made while night rambling for the DHS and other brands that remained the strongest throughout his life. Almost 7 feet wide, Charles M. Russell and Friends was a gift to his good friend and patron Malcolm McKay, created to hang in his family's fireplace of their Russell room in the Tenafly, New Jersey home. The painting, or poster, as Nancy called it, Russell placed himself prominently situated in the foreground on a hilltop, seated astride a horse. He gestures with his left arm outstretched, inviting viewers to meet his friends, both cowboys and Indians, who are riding up to greet him. The figures are set against a panoramic backdrop composed of the Missouri River in the middle ground, square root flanked by the Rocky Mountain front in the distant background. One early companion observed many years later on Charlie's likability. For when all is said and done, even if Charlie could not have painted any kind of picture, he would have been just as popular, for he was a good mixer and could reel all kinds of yarns, and that was something needed in cow country. For Russell today, nothing provides a more intimate glimpse of his personality than do his letters to friends. And back then, nothing was more cherished by those lucky enough to receive one. Russell penned this letter to his good friend and saloon proprietor Bill Rance to thank him for his case of joy juice that he'd sent to Bullhead Lodge for the Russells to use in entertaining their summer guests. Jokingly, Charlie indicated that he might sell the liquor instead. He wrote, "Most of the fellers I see up here don't look like Coca-Cola men. Catch one of these long, thirsty, leg-weary fishermen and with nothing but water to drink, and he'll buy red ink at your price and thank you for it. And with all the high-grade joy juice of yours, Bill, I could have them writing home for money." In spite of the fact, as a younger man, Russell had a drinking problem and had given up alcohol himself, he did not begrudge others imbibing. He did, however, resent the booze fighters and other reformers that changed the way they were trying to change Montana. During 1892 and 1893, Russell and 6 other friends, including Bill McDonough, batched together in a small cabin in Chinook, where provisions were extremely scarce. Russell's slim income from his art, along with occasional stolen chicken and rations obtained on credit, kept them fed. In an effort to improve their financial lot, the Hungry Seven, as they were dubbed, attempted for a short time to run a saloon. Years later, Russell recalled his questionable bartending skills. He said, "A stranger asked for a cocktail and I built one. It ought to have been good. I put everything in the black bar in it, even that piece of lemon skin I had." He continues, "The guy only took one swallow and left the house and was never seen after it. Maybe he went to Milk River and put the fire out and got bogged down in the quicksand." And then he laments, "The booze parley didn't last long, 14 days. It was like a life of a butterfly, short but very merry one." Riding the goat was a ritual used to initiate a member into the Elks Lodge, as well as other fraternal lodges. While some fraternal groups use the mechanical reproduction goat, the Elks are believed to have used an actual goat for their ceremony. Here, the goat is saddled and branded with the head of an elk, and Charlie has just broke him. Charlie looks a little worse for wear. His hair and clothing are disheveled, his Assumption sash has fallen away, and the goat has trodden on his hat. This was presented to his fellow Elks in Great Falls after his initiation in March of 1908. In the spring of 1916, the Russells were once again in New York when Charlie took the opportunity to regale Bill Rance and the bunch with his views on modern fashion. "Maybe you think this lady is stripped for a bath," he observed, "but you're wrong. She's at dinner. This evening, garments of a female in this camp wouldn't pad a crutch. If clothing is a sign of civilization and paint spells heathen, judging from the she-folks, I'm among the savages." In 1920, the Russells spent February through April in Southern California. It was the first of what would become an annual sojourn orchestrated by Nancy to escape Montana's harsh winters and spend the time among the fashionable crowds and potential. As always, Russell would have preferred to be home in Montana, but he did enjoy the opportunity to mingle with Western stars such as Tom Mix, Bill Hart, and Will Rogers, with whom he would become friends. But more often, he was amused or dumbfounded by the people that he met and the sights he saw. In this letter, he describes an excursion to the beach, picturing himself in a bathing suit that highlights his protruding belly and white bandy legs. He observes, "Anytime you or any of your he or she friends start thinking you're losing your beauty lines that your youth gave you, come to Long Beach and you'll feel better. Nobody's barred. Clothing is made to hide or lie, but bathing suits are truthful." He goes on, "For several years, old Dad Time has been handing me things I didn't want and ain't been thankful for his favors. But since I took a look at Long Beach, I think the old gent's been damn good to me." When I started planning this talk, I was going to tell you everything you needed to know about Charlie. Of course, that was impossible, so I thought I'd narrow it down to everything you should know about the Historical Society collection. And that soon became apparent that that, too, was too much information for one talk. So I consulted with my colleague Kirby, and we decided that the only solution is that you need to buy the book. We hope you will, or do check it out from the library, because we do want you to know more about why we think Charlie is so special and why the Montana Historical Society collection of art is so special. And as I mentioned before, this catalog has been long anticipated by many of us here at the Society, and Kirby and I consider ourselves to be incredibly lucky and fortunate to be the ones to actually got to write it. But it was also a lot of work. This is what we looked like when we started. But the publication of this scope is sort of like a child, and it does take a village. There are many, many, many people who are involved in this production, too many to thank here, but we do want to mention a few. Firstly, we do need to thank Richard Gruber of Wapiti, Wyoming, whose generous gift made this whole production possible. If not for Richard's generosity, this catalog would still only be a dream for us. And of course, we wouldn't have had anything to show of our research efforts without the incredible talent of our publication staff, and the research itself would not have been nearly as easy or productive without the many contributions of our research center staff, the museum program, and education staff. And we'd also like to single out a few other people. We are immensely grateful to scholars, Brian Dippy and Rick Stewart, who helped shepherd this whole project through. It would not have been a success without their input. And Tom Ferris, the photographer, who photographed all 230 works in the catalog. This is the camera Tom was using. Before, but due to Richard's generous gift, we were able to buy high-tech, state-of-the-art digital equipment, and I can't say enough about what a difference this type of equipment has made to this publication, and this legacy lives on. We use this equipment to photograph our collection for other purposes. And for Diane Hall, for her impeccable design sense in making the book look wonderful. This is the design for the limited edition leather-bound book. And finally, we want to thank Bob Morgan, our own Bob Morgan, for his innumerable contributions, not only to this catalog, but to the world of understanding and appreciation of Russell and his art over the past 60 years since he first started working at the Montana Historical Society. It's so easy to understand why the catalog is dedicated to Bob and his wife, Jen. And then finally, Nancy says, buy the book. Before I let you go, I have just very quickly, I want to announce something really exciting. We have just launched the museum's online catalog, starting with the Russell collection. We have over 50,000 objects in the collection, so it's going to take us quite a bit of time to get all of them up there, but at this point, we have our Russell collection on there, thanks to the efforts of Kelly Webb. I'm not sure if Kelly's in the audience right now. Thank you, Kelly, for all the hard work you did on making this possible. Unfortunately, I cannot show you it live here, but if you go to our website, you will be able to click, you can click down on the museum collection. You'll see collections. It will take you to a searchable database, and you'll be able to click on the Russell section by media if you'd like. And here's what you'll come up will be the oils. If you click the oils, here's the catalog record, and you can get a look at each of our pieces in the collection, close up and personal. You can also, I'll go back here, you see over on the right, you can email your friend, or if you have something you need to tell us about it, you see something that we forgot or something you have a question about, you can contact us. And that's all I have. Thank you.